Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
I'm a fiction reader, and anybody who's a fiction reader knows that a big part of fiction is gossip. You're peering into the life of someone else, and you're peering into the mind of the author. What could be more delicious and juicy? So I link gossip and fiction very closely.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I've written 6 books about raising happy families, and I'm a parent to 6 daughters with my co-host and wife, Kylie, who you know best as Mrs. Happy Families. And before you start talking, because I can see that it's on the tip of your tongue, I'm so excited about today because we're going to talk about gossip. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, you're such a tease. I was going to talk about that.
You can. More about gossip in a sec. But I'm excited for today. That's all I'm saying.
Well, for the last 2 Wednesdays, we've been talking with Susan Engel, who's an educator and researcher in the areas of psychology and education, as well as authoring the books The Hungry Mind, The Origins of Curiosity in Childhood, and The Intellectual Lives of Children.
So if you've missed the last couple of interviews, it's worth going back. We'll link to the last 2 episodes in the show notes. I've made this abundantly clear. I really love what Susan has done, especially with her book, The Hungry Mind. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you're in education or if you're a parent who cares about your children's learning, I just think that it's compulsory reading. It's such a great book. Highly recommended by yours truly.
Well, you were a bit of a tease at the beginning, but I'm going to ask a question anyway. Welcome back to the podcast, Susan.
Okay, great to talk to you.
In The Hungry Mind, you talk about gossip and how it fuels learning. Justin gave us a little bit of tease at the beginning, but can you explain more about this idea?
Yeah, so mystery fuels learning. We've talked about that. Things that are unexpected, things that make you want to delve in, whether it's a pile of bugs under some leaves or whether it's a topic you've never thought about before.
And this is why clickbait works so well in news sites, right? Because clickbait works so well in news sites, right? Because mystery, what's behind the title here?
And there's some really interesting new research showing the way in which you can do you can feed your curiosity online with that kind of clickbaiting, or the way in which you can avoid really learning about anything because you're just skimming. That's a whole other topic. So, but Google can be a child's friend if they're encouraged to use it in a good way, and if they're encouraged to kind of pursue something in depth rather than jumping around for little quick hits of pleasure. But gossip is so human. Wanting to know what's happening in the lives of other people is just about as human as you can get. And while not all people are equally interested in gossip, many people like it a lot, and kids like it. So at a pretty early age, kids want to know, did you really throw up before you got to school today? I heard you did. And are you trying out for band? Because I'm going to try out. And, how would you get on the test? And a lot of that, or did you really kiss her in the hallway? I mean, kids do the same thing grown-ups do. They want to know about other people. And who doesn't love a good story about a neighbor or a rival or a teacher? Oh my God, kids love gossip about teachers. And I think if we understood that it's a very healthy form of gossip and of curiosity and a way to encourage kids to gather knowledge, we take a different stance towards it. Actually, there's some great research about the way in which humans everywhere use gossip as a form of cautioning to children, to teach them what are the expected norms in their culture. So you tell cautionary tales when you gossip, who did the wrong thing and got in trouble and had a bad end. And so we instinctively use gossip for good purposes as well as bad ones. But I would just end this by saying that one thing that I think people overlook, but I'm comfortable saying because I love gossip. I've already told you that. I mean, after all, I'm a psychologist. I always want to know more about people. And 2, I'm a fiction reader. And anybody who's a fiction reader knows that a big part of fiction is gossip. You're peering into the life of someone else, and you're peering into the mind of the author. What could be more delicious and juicy? So I link gossip and fiction very closely. And I think if grown-ups understood that some of the time that children are chit-chatting about other people, they're probably just paving the way for being really great fiction readers or fiction writers. It would give them a different view of it.
Yeah, or psychologists. Okay, so one last quick question for you, Susan, before we dive into this rapid fire. When we were talking earlier, you talked about boredom and how boredom, when you were a child, was a spark or an opportunity for you to get curious and explore. And there's a big trend for the last few years about encouraging parents to let their children be bored, because when children are bored, they get to explore and learn and discover and become creative and so forth. Yeah. I also argue, though, that boredom is often quite unhealthy. Boredom is associated with depression. Boredom is associated with any number of negative outcomes, and boredom is often associated with delinquent behavior. When kids get bored, they go and start to stir up their sister or their brother, and they graffiti all over a wall or something like that. Yeah. So I'm really curious about where boredom can be positive and how it can be negative, and how parents can manage that in such a way that they give their children the benefits of boredom without the downside.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a magic formula there, but it is complicated, because kids, I was thinking before about when I first said that my kids had a lot of free time when they were little, and how it's not a good idea to overstructure your child's after school life or their weekends. But it is true that children who are stuck watching TV all the time, or who are left at home because their parents don't have the opportunity to be with them, at the end of the school day. So it's often not the parents' fault. It's society's fault for imposing a difficult life on them. Those kids suffer a kind of boredom that isn't good for them. They become restless, or their mind turns off, or they turn to trouble. And it's terrible anyway. It's just not a good way to live. So there is, if not a formula, some magical equation there. A little bit of boredom goes a long way. I would put it that way. And it's one thing to give your child unstructured time in a fairly interesting, nice environment, whether it's nice because they get to play on a safe sidewalk with other neighbors, or because they're in a park, or because they're in a house where they can explore. I don't mean here plush and luxurious. I mean both safe and interesting, filled with things that would be interesting to examine or create or build. When that is a good kind of boredom, because it allows them to explore and to fall on their own resources. But that's different than sort of being having a kind of barren and deprived environment. And I'm not talking about that. So unstructured time where kids have to figure out what they want to do or make things or, poke around and investigate, that's wonderful. And that's the kind of boredom. Also, I will say daydreaming is a good thing for kids, but not daydreaming all day or for hours on end, because then kids are lonely and they do go a little nutty. So I don't mean that.
So, Susan, just to wrap up our final chat with you, we thought it would be fun to play a bit of a game. We call it the Fast Five, where we shoot through 5 rapid questions. Okay, so Susan, if we were to ask your kids their favourite things to do with you, they're in their 30s now, but what would they say?
I think they'd say talking with me.
Being curious about the world together.
Yes, it's a nice way to put it. We also like to eat together and take hikes together, but talking is the number one. What's your trickiest parenting moment as you reflect on the years? Oh, my God. I wrote a piece about this in the New York Times a few years ago. The most circulated thing I've ever written, because it was about how agonizing it is to watch your grown-up children go through painful experiences. By far, that's the hardest thing, watching your grown-up children face adversity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I often reflect that they don't have to be grown up to find it hard. When just watching your children go through hard things is so tricky. It's terrible. It's just when they're little, you have more agency over it. When they're grown up, you just have to sit there and be miserable. Yeah. Question number 3, if you could spend an hour with your children at any age at all, what age would you choose and why? That's an impossible question for me. Right now, I'd say now as grown-ups. I love having grown-up children. I love being with my kids. So 2 of my sons live right next door with their partners and their brand new babies. And
So how could I wish them to be any other age than the age they are? That said, you can tell I like being a mom, and I loved it when they were little too. Maybe it's because I had boys, or maybe I lucked out. I really liked having teenagers. I thought it was really fun to have teenage kids.
Yeah, the energy and the enthusiasm
for life.
For
everybody.
No, definitely not.
I found it fun. Yeah.
No matter how good life has been and how glad you are to be in the moment with your 30-plus-year-old kids, what are you still looking forward to as a mum, or maybe even a grandma?
Seeing them thrive. I mean, I'm too old for you to ask that, for me to give the usual kind of answer to that. Too many of the things I have to look forward to are not that good. But and now watching them, I know, I have an answer. Watching them be parents, it has been amazing. And so something I would never have expected, and I didn't think about 1 second before my grandchildren were born. But it's quite overwhelming in a good way to watch your own children be parents. Yeah.
Last question, Susan. If you could go back to Susan Engel as a young mum, having one of those tough moments with no experience being a parent at all, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, I was a working mom, and I would give myself the advice of slowing down a little and not being in such a rush all the time, and just cherish more of the moments I had with them.
Such great advice, such a wonderful conversation. If people want to know more about you, the work that you do, your books, I mean, you've written extensively. The book that I have been talking about primarily is The Hungry Mind. But where do people go to find out more about Susan Engel?
Well, there's plenty about me on the web, on whatever it's called, the internet. I've given a lot of talks that are on the internet. The World Wide Web, I almost said, but that's really out of date. I have a new book called The Intellectual Lives of Children that picks up where the Curiosity book left off. I don't know. They can write to me, whatever.
Susan, thanks so much for being so generous with your time and sharing some wonderful wisdom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan.
Okay.
So that concludes our conversation with Susan, the author of The Hungry Mind, which addresses curiosity in children, and her latest book is The Intellectual Lives of Children, which picks up right where The Hungry Mind left off. Professor Susan Engel. We really hope that you've enjoyed the podcast and that it has helped you to make your family happier and do great things in your family. Speaking of people who have enjoyed the podcast, Jess, this nickname is too common, has given us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I love the names that people come up with when they put their ratings and reviews in. Jess, this nickname is too common, has said 5 stars, opening doors for new perspective and more love for my children. She says, I'm a new listener, thoroughly enjoying the topics explored. The information which comes from experience and scientific findings to go along with it is invaluable. I'm already a mother who endeavours to parent mindfully and kindly, but listening to the podcast is absolutely opening doors for new perspective and, in turn, more love for my children. It's a wonderful added bonus that they're Aussies too, because, hey, Aussies are great.
Hey, I'm loving that she's a new listener. That's awesome.
Yeah, great to have you along, Jess. Thanks so much for taking time out to leave a rating and review. If you do enjoy the podcast, please do what Jess did and leave those 5-star ratings and reviews, because that way other people get to find out about the podcast and make their families happier. We really appreciate the work of Justin Rulon, our producer from Bridge Media, and our executive producer, Craig Bruce. If you'd like more information about making your family happier, check out happyfamilies.com.au.